There is a family in English history where the women were called cursed for 2 generations running, and history was wrong both times. The mother buried 5 children and was told her body had been rejected by God. The daughter swelled twice with babies that were never there and was told her mind had finally broken. 2 women, the same blame, the same lie, and the truth, both times, was written in their bodies, not in their souls. The daughter is the one you think you know. Mary Tudor didn't just imagine 2 children that were never there, her body built them. Every sign of pregnancy that a kingdom waited on, she produced. The swollen belly that strained her gowns until her dresses no longer fit, the sickness in the mornings, the periods that stopped, the breasts that grew heavy, and milk. Her body made milk. It produced milk with no child to feed, for a child that did not exist. History gave her a verdict and moved on, mad, barren, so desperate for a baby that her own longing fooled her. Bloody Mary, they called her. And then they laughed at the Queen, who twice swelled up with nothing, and twice had to walk back into a court that knew. 500 years of that. The hysteric who wanted a baby so badly she invented one. But notice what that verdict quietly skips. A longing in the mind does not make a body lactate. A wish does not stop a 14-year-old girl's periods a quarter of a century before she ever meets a husband. Something physical was happening inside her, something that had been happening her whole life, that the men around her had no name for and no instrument to find. There is a detail buried in her own physician's notes, and in the dispatches her ambassadors sent abroad, that points away from her mind entirely and toward a single hidden cause sitting in her body. Her body was not lying to her mind. Something was making her body lie. And to understand it, you have to start 1 generation earlier, with her mother, because Mary inherited more than a crown. She inherited a verdict. Once you know where to look, every cruel thing history ever said about both women reads differently. This is not the story of a mad woman, and it is not the story of 1 woman at all. It is the story of 2, a mother and a daughter, and a misdiagnosis 500 years old, that the world hung on both of them. We are going to reopen the file, both files. Treat it the way you would treat any cold case. Generation 1, a queen who in 9 years was pregnant 6 times and buried 5 children, branded barren, cursed, divinely rejected. We are going to lay her losses out in order, dated and numbered, the way you would lay out evidence, because her record is its own case file, and almost no one has ever read it as one. Generation 2, her daughter, who produced 2 pregnancies that yielded no children but produced every other sign of pregnancy in a real, recorded way, and was branded mad, barren, hysterical for it. Her ill health was logged from the age of 14 by trained physicians, written into ambassador reports, painted into her own portraits. We will build her a numbered case file too, finding by finding, dated and counted, and a pattern appears. The word hysteria was never built to hold. These are not the contents of a daydream, they are clinical signs, a body counterfeiting life, twice, in front of an entire nation. So this is 2 numbered ledgers stacked into one, the mother's losses and the daughter's findings, mapped side by side. By the end of this, you will know exactly what could make a woman's body manufacture the whole apparatus of motherhood with no child inside it, and why the same hidden thing that humiliated the daughter in front of Europe may also be the thing that killed her. This is not really a story about 1 unlucky queen, but about a bloodline of women blamed for their bodies across 2 generations, and how the second spent her whole life terrified of becoming the first. The answer was never her sanity. It was one thing, physical, hidden, with a name medicine would not learn for 300 years, doing all of it. If that is the kind of history you came here for, the real story under the cartoon, subscribe and stay with me to the end, because the end is where this turns. The 30th of April, 1555, Hampton Court. The bells start before dawn. First one church, then another, then the whole of London answering across the river, a sound that rolls out over the rooftops and does not stop. A prince has been born. The Queen has been delivered of a son. The word runs through the streets faster than any rider, and the city does what it has been holding its breath to do for months. Bonfires go up at the corners. Strangers embrace. The succession is safe. England has a Catholic heir, and the long fear is over. Across the water, in a darkened chamber at Hampton Court, the Queen of England is not delivered of anything. She has been shut in this room for weeks, as custom demands, the windows hung against the light. She is 39, and she has spent her whole life trying to prove she is not her mother, not cursed, not rejected, not a woman whose body fails. Catherine of Aragon had buried 5 children and been told by husband and church and country that her empty arms were the judgment of God. Mary grew up the one child who lived, the survivor of a woman the whole realm had agreed was cursed. And now, for the last several months, the body under her gown swelled. The physicians confirmed it, and she herself felt the child quicken. She is certain. The cradle stands ready. The midwives wait. This is the child that finally proves the curse stopped with her mother, and the child does not come. Outside, the bells are ringing for a birth that has not happened. Inside, Mary sits on cushions on the floor, not in a bed, on the floor, with her knees drawn up to her chin, rocking, the way you might sit trying to make yourself small enough to disappear. Her women watch and say nothing. There is nothing to say. The swelling is real. The sickness was real. The stopped courses, the heavy breasts, all of it real, recorded, sworn to. Everything about her body says mother, and there is no child, and there is not going to be one, and somewhere out there a city is lighting fires for her son. She did not invent the swelling to please a court. The court counted on it. The cradle, the confinement, the prayers ordered in every parish, the ambassadors writing home that the Queen's belly grew larger by the week, all of it built on a body that genuinely, measurably changed. By nightfall the truth has caught up to the bells and the celebrations are quietly called off, and still the signs do not vanish on cue. The swelling lingers into the summer until by July her abdomen has visibly receded, and the Venetian ambassador writes the cruelest line of the year, that the Queen's great pregnancy was likelier to end in wind rather than anything else. How do you tell a woman that her body lied to her? And worse, 500 years later, how do you decide whether it was her body that lied or her mind? The two are not the same accusation. One makes her sick, the other makes her mad. History chose the second for the daughter and cursed for the mother. We are going to test the first. Here is the version you were handed. Mary Tudor is Bloody Mary, a grim, narrow Catholic who took the throne in 1553 and tried to drag England back to Rome by fire, burning nearly 300 Protestants at the stake until the smoke became her whole legacy. And alongside the cruelty, the pathos, a sad, baby-obsessed woman who married a Spanish prince who didn't want her and twice convinced herself she was carrying his child when she was carrying nothing at all. She wanted a baby so badly, the story goes, that her mind manufactured the belief and her body played along, and twice the Queen was left exposed before the world when no child arrived. The medical word for it, the kind word, is pseudocysis, a false pregnancy, a phantom, the body producing the signs of a child with no child there, a real condition, documented for centuries, a woman under enormous pressure to conceive who develops genuine physical signs of pregnancy without a fetus. Rare, but real. So the modern, sympathetic telling closes the case gently. Poor Mary, childless, loveless, terrified of dying without an heir, and handing her crown to her Protestant half-sister. Of course her mind broke this way. Of course she imagined it. Case closed. And I want to be fair to that story, because it is not stupid. The pressure on her was crushing and real. When Henry annulled his union with Catherine and married Anne Boleyn, Mary was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title, separated from the mother she would never see again, threatened until she signed a document denying her own legitimacy. She spent her youth as living proof of how disposable a woman could be when a dynasty wanted a son, and as the daughter of a woman the whole country had agreed was cursed. Now hold that, because it is the engine of everything. Mary did not merely want a child the way any queen wanted an heir. She needed one to prove she was not her mother, that the curse stopped with Catherine. So when she married Philip at 38, old for a first pregnancy and she knew it, the child inside her carried an impossible weight. If she failed, everything passed to Elizabeth, and the curse would have the last word. A woman under that kind of pressure, longing that hard, yes, the mind can do strange things to the body. The pseudocysis reading is not a fantasy, it is the careful mainstream answer. But hold 3 things in your hand before we go further. because the official story walks past all three without slowing down. First, and remember this, because it is the thread that unravels everything, her body did not merely look pregnant, it lactated. Attendants and physicians recorded her breasts swelling and producing milk. Not she said she felt full. Milk. Her body made milk, with no child to feed, what doctors now call galactorrhea, a body preparing physically to feed a child that was not there. Second, notice the dates don't behave. Her courses had been stopping and starting, unreliable and strange, since she was about 14, a quarter of a century before Philip of Spain ever set foot in England. Third, the woman in the official story is supposed to be ill in her mind, but the record keeps describing a body ill in very specific, very physical ways. Headaches for decades, a face that changed, and no one asks why. 3 threads, all left hanging. We are going to pull them. But first we have to read the other case file, the mother's, because the official story treats Catherine as nothing but the source of Mary's fear and never lays out what actually happened inside her body. Lay it out, dated and numbered, and it stops being a curse and starts being data. Before we touch a single one of Mary's symptoms, put Catherine of Aragon's pregnancies on the table, all of them, dated, in order, because for 500 years they have been read as a verdict and never as a data set. Read them as a case file, and let the sequence speak. She marries Henry in 1509, 23, devout, the daughter of the 2 monarchs who unified Spain. And then her body begins a 9-year ordeal the record lets us follow almost month by month. The 31st of January, 1510, Catherine miscarries a daughter, far enough along that the physicians can tell the child's sex, not far enough to live. Loss number 1. Henry is disappointed, not alarmed. They are young. The 1st of January, 1511. New Year's Day. Catherine delivers a son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, alive, healthy, loud. England has its prince. The king holds a tournament. Bonfires burn across the country. And then, 52 days later, with no warning and no explanation any physician can offer, the baby is dead. Loss number 2. Hold that number, 52 days, because it is the strangest entry in either woman's file. Not a stillbirth, not a child who died at birth, but a baby healthy enough to live for nearly 2 months and then to fade. Something gradual, something that worsened. September 1513. Another son, premature, stillborn. Loss number 3. Henry is away at war in France. She buries this one without him. November 1514. Another son, he lives minutes. Loss number 4. The 18th of February, 1516. A daughter, and this one breathes and cries and lives. Mary, the single surviving child, the one the rest of this video is about. The 10th of November, 1518. A last pregnancy, a daughter, stillborn. Loss number 5. After that, at 33, Catherine never conceives again. Now stop and count it the way a coroner would, not the way a bishop did. 6 pregnancies in 9 years, 1 daughter who lived, 5 children dead, numbered 1 through 5, a stillborn girl, a son gone at 52 days, a stillborn son, a son gone in minutes, a stillborn girl. That is not a moral pattern. It is a biological one. A woman's body does not lose 5 children across 9 years because her soul is unclean. It loses them because something physical is happening that nobody in the room can name. Modern researchers have in fact proposed biological explanations for Catherine's losses too. We will not put a name to hers, because that is a separate grave we have no right to open. But the very fact that the question is now medical, not moral, tells you how badly the age misread her. The men around Catherine had exactly one framework for a sequence like this, and it was sin. They looked at a dated list of 5 reproductive losses, the kind a doctor today would scan for a pattern, and called it the judgment of God. They believed it so completely that when Henry wanted to be rid of her, the dead babies became his proof. 5 small witnesses, he argued, that heaven had rejected the union from the start, exactly as Leviticus warned. A man who takes his brother's widow shall be childless. She died for that verdict the 7th of January, 1536, alone in a damp castle at Kimbolton, moved there because the man who had been her husband no longer wanted the country to look at her, still signing her last letter as his wife and his queen. That is the first ledger. 1 mother, 6 pregnancies, 5 numbered losses, 1 survivor, recast as a curse and buried under it. Remember the shape of it. 5 dated losses read as a verdict, because the daughter is about to generate a numbered file of her own, and the age is about to make the identical mistake again, now to the survivor. And we do for her exactly what we just did for her mother. Open a case file and number it, finding by finding. 5 numbered losses for Catherine. Watch the daughter's count climb past it. Start where her body started failing, long before anyone was watching for a pregnancy. When Mary was about 14, around puberty, her mother's physicians, Catherine's own doctors, the very men who had attended all 6 of those pregnancies, diagnosed her with what they called strangulation of the womb. Strip away the Tudor language and look at what they actually described, and enter it into evidence. Finding 1. Her courses stop. At 14, her periods turn irregular, then absent, what we now call amenorrhea, the monthly cycle shutting down a quarter of a century before any husband. Finding 2. Her abdomen swells and aches, pain and a distension the physicians can see and feel in a girl carrying nothing. Finding 3. A depressed, heavy mood settles on her. Fear, sorrowfulness, a weight she cannot lift. 3 findings on the table, and the patient is 14 years old. Read that back and date it. This is a teenage girl. No husband, no pressure to produce an heir. A princess with a living mother, her father not yet having thrown her life into the fire. There is no reason on earth for her mind to be faking the signs of pregnancy. And yet findings 1, 2, and 3 are already the exact signs that, decades later, the world would explain away as a lovesick queen's wishful thinking. Whatever was wrong with Mary Tudor's body did not begin in a marriage bed at 38. It began at 14, 3 findings deep before she has even grown. Remember that age. And here is where the 2 files touch for the first time. Standing at the 14-year-old Mary's bedside are her mother's physicians, the same men who had just spent 9 years failing to explain 6 pregnancies and 5 small graves. They had watched the mother's body refuse to carry. Now the daughters refused to behave from puberty onward, and they had for both the same instinct. Something is wrong with this woman in a way we cannot name. The same doctors, the same blind spot, and it did not stop. Finding 4. Chronic headaches, recurring and severe, year after year through her 20s and 30s. In 1536, the very year her mother died alone in that castle, she reports to Thomas Cromwell a litany of ailments: headache, toothache, neuralgia, insomnia. And across the decades her physicians keep treating her for periods that come strangely or do not come at all, a body generating a steady stream of physical findings clustered around the same 2 systems, her reproductive cycle and her head. So here is the running tally before we even reach the marriage. 2 ledgers, not 1. The mother. 6 pregnancies, 5 numbered losses, branded cursed. The daughter. 4 numbered findings already, stopped courses, a swollen aching belly, a crushing low mood, years of headaches, every one logged before anyone breathed the word pregnancy, not one with a motive to be invented. 4 findings down, and we have not yet reached the phantom children at all. Now the marriage. The 25th of July, 1554. Mary marries Philip of Spain at Winchester. She is 38. He is 11 years younger, sent north by his father the emperor for an alliance, and he does not pretend to be in love. Within weeks the signs begin, and by autumn the court believes the queen is pregnant, not on her word alone. This is finding 5, and watch how the evidence inside it accumulates, because this is the part the she imagined it verdict has to explain. Her belly swells visibly. The ambassadors report in writing that her stomach clearly shows it, and her dresses no longer fit. She has morning sickness, nausea, vomiting, her appetite changes, her courses stop, and then the thing that turns suspicion into certainty, she feels the child move, the quickening. To a 16th century woman that flutter was the unmistakable proof of life, and a thanksgiving service is sung for it. On the 3rd of April 1555, the whole court moves to Hampton Court for her confinement, the birth expected in May. Then comes the 30th of April, and the bells we already heard. the false report, the bonfires for a prince who was never born, the slow public unwinding through the summer. By August, after the better part of a year of every outward sign of pregnancy, Mary has to accept what the whole of Europe already knows. There is no child. She emerges thin, sick, and humiliated, and in September Philip leaves. Now sit with the strangeness of it. This was no brief delusion. For the better part of a year a woman's body sustained the swelling, the sickness, the stopped courses, an enormous physical performance for wishful thinking to direct. And look at who was testifying to it. Not Mary's flatterers, but the foreign ambassadors. Simon Renard, the imperial envoy writing to Charles V, the Venetian diplomats writing to their republic, professional skeptics whose job was to send their masters the unvarnished truth about a matter of state, every incentive to get it right, none to be kind. And for months they reported, in writing, that the Queen's belly grew and her shape changed. The men least likely to be fooled by wishful thinking were fooled, because what they were looking at was not wishful thinking. It was a body. Finding 5, logged. 1 fully documented phantom pregnancy, swelling, sickness, stopped courses, quickening, witnessed by hostile professionals. 5 findings deep now, almost every one in the flesh and almost nothing in the mind, and a 6th is coming that is harder still to explain away. Before the 2nd pregnancy, log the detail the official story keeps in a drawer, because it belongs on the table with a number on it. Finding 6, lactation. Across that first confinement, her attendants and physicians recorded her breasts swelling and producing milk. Not fullness, not sensation, milk. For a child that was never there, what doctors now call galactorrhea. Every other sign on this list can at least be argued at by a septic. A body producing milk with no infant cannot. 6 findings now, and the 6th is the one a longing mind has no way to fake. And if the first false pregnancy can be waved away as a one-time breakdown under unbearable pressure, the 7th finding is much harder to dismiss, because the 2nd time nobody believed her, and her body did it anyway. Philip comes back to England briefly in 1557, mostly to ask for money and soldiers for his war with France. And in early 1558, Mary is convinced again. Finding 7, a 2nd phantom pregnancy. The signs return. Her belly swells, but this time the court has learned. Her own advisers suspect it is not a child but the change of life, menopause, or some swelling, a dropsy. They humour her to her face and disbelieve her behind their hands. Only one woman, her attendant Friedzweid Strelly, is honest enough to tell her plainly there is no baby. Mary, later, thanks her for it. Stop and feel the weight of that. The first time, you could argue the whole court's hope swept her up with it. A nation expecting a child, a husband present, prayers in every church. The 2nd time, there is none of it. No celebration, no cradle. A husband who came mainly for money and left again. A court burned once that now watches the Queen's belly with pity and private doubt. The longing is hers alone now, and her body swells anyway. That is the crack that runs deepest. If pseudopsoriasis is the longing mind convincing the body, then the signs should track the belief. Strongest when it is shared and total, weakest when the Queen is isolated and doubted. Instead they do the opposite. They return in full even as the belief collapses around her. They were never being driven by what Mary thought, but by something in her body that did not know or care who in the room believed her. Finding 6 and 7 logged. Milk with no child, and a 2nd false pregnancy 3 years after the first. Staged for an audience that had stopped clapping. 7 findings on the table, and only the longing inside them could ever be laid at the door of the mind. And the 7th is the one that should make you genuinely uneasy. Here is where we step outside the pregnancies entirely, because if the cause is only a longing for children, it should confine itself to pregnancy. It does not, and the findings keep coming, none of them about a womb. Look at her face. In 1554, the painter Antonis More, the Spanish court's portraitist, takes Mary's likeness, and painters of that court painted what they saw. Finding 8, her eyebrows are thinning, disappearing from her face. Finding 9, the face itself has changed, cheeks flushed, pudgy and puffy, the skin pale, the hairline receding. None of that is a sign of pregnancy, real or imagined. A woman does not lose her eyebrows because she wants a baby. Now add the findings that bracket her whole life and have nothing to do with her womb. Finding 10. A voice gone rough and deep, and skin gone dry and thickening. Finding 11. Constipation severe enough to distend the abdomen on its own. A swelling belly that owes nothing to a child, and alongside it, bouts of mental confusion. And then, in the last year, finding 12, the one that should stop you cold. In the autumn of 1558, Mary's eyesight collapses. Not gradual long-sightedness, a near total loss of vision. The Queen of England, who all her life took comfort in her books and her prayers, can no longer read. She is going blind from the inside, with no injury and no infection anyone can point to. Lay all 12 beside one another, and the shape of the case changes. We no longer have a woman who imagined 2 pregnancies. We have 2 ledgers, finished and counted. The mother's 5 dated losses read as a curse. The daughter's 12 dated findings read as madness. And of those 12, only one, the longing for a child threaded through findings 5 and 7, fits a mind that simply wanted a baby. The other 11 describe a body whose every system, from her womb to her eyebrows to her failing sight, is being dragged in one direction across nearly 30 years. Not a string of unrelated misfortunes, a progression, and things that worsen together in a body over decades usually share a single root. So let us put every theory on the table, the way a coroner would, and test each against the full ledger, all 12 findings, the whole 30-year span, not the convenient parts. Watch how each suspect comes up short. Suspect 1, pseudocyesis, the psychological false pregnancy, the reigning verdict. Give it its full due. It is a real, documented condition, rare, on the order of a handful of cases in 20,000 births, but real. It tends to strike women under enormous pressure to conceive, with histories of trauma and loss, which describes Mary almost perfectly, and it can genuinely produce amenorrhea, a swelling abdomen, even the reported sensation of a child moving. If all we had were findings 5 and 7, the 2 pregnancies, it would be a strong answer. But look at what it cannot carry. By definition, it is the mind acting on the body. So even at its most sympathetic, it makes Mary the author of her own humiliation, the exact move the court made on her mother. And it explains a window, not a life. It has nothing to say about findings 1 through 4, the disorder that began at 14, years before there was anyone to long for. It strains badly to account for finding 6, the milk. And it says nothing about findings 8 through 12, the eyebrows, the changed face, the decades of headaches, the blindness at the end. Pseudocyesis may well be a piece of this. It cannot be the whole of it. Suspect 2, cancer. Ovarian, uterine, even stomach cancer have all been proposed, and at her death the records note dropsy, a swelling of fluid in the body. A malignant growth in the abdomen could swell her belly and could absolutely kill a woman at 42. As an explanation for finding 12 and her death alone, it is a serious candidate. But run it the length of the ledger and it falls apart. A growth in the womb or the gut does not fill the breasts with milk, does not reach back and stop a 14-year-old's periods a quarter of a century before it appears, does not thin the eyebrows or take the eyesight. Cancer can explain how the story ends, not how it ran for 30 years. Suspect 3, hypothyroidism, an underactive thyroid, the gland in the neck that sets the body's pace. This one is genuinely interesting, because it lands the findings everything else missed. Findings 8 through 11, the lost eyebrows, the weight gain, the rough voice, the thickening skin, the constipation, the confusion, the depression, the puffy flushed face more painted. All at once the irrelevant findings, the ones with nothing to do with babies, have a home, and for the first time a single condition reaches across her whole body instead of just her womb, but it has a decisive gap. On its own, it does not make a woman lactate. It cannot carry finding 6, and that is the tell. One theory explains the pregnancies but not the eyebrows, another the death but not the life, a third the face but not the milk. Every suspect accounts for one region of the ledger and leaves the rest dark. When every candidate explains a slice and none explains the whole, you have not yet found the single thing sitting underneath them all. So ask the question that cracks the case. What if it is not 3 conditions but 1? A single cause that could stop her periods at 14, swell and milk her breasts with no child, take her eyebrows, climb into her skull as decades of headaches, and finally reach her eyes with the failing thyroid as a knock-on effect rather than a coincidence. One cause that closes out all 12 findings, leaving none of them dark. There is such a cause, and here is what makes it quietly devastating. It is not exotic, not a stretch. It is a condition any endocrinologist alive today would recognize on sight. The only reason it went unnamed for 500 years is that it lives in a place no Tudor physician ever thought to look. They spent her whole life staring at her womb. The thing that was wrong with her was not in her womb at all. The strongest single explanation for Mary Tudor is a small benign growth, no bigger than a pea, on the master gland that sits at the base of the brain, just behind the eyes, the gland that quietly controls much of the body's hormones. Not in her womb, where every physician of her age stared for 30 years, several inches higher, in a gland so small the Tudor world did not even know it existed. This is no guess. It was argued most fully by Dr. Milo Keynes in the Journal of Medical Biography in the year 2000, discussed earlier by Dr. V.C. Medvay in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, and pressed by the anthropologist Kyra Cornelius Kramer, who has argued for years that these Tudor women were blamed for organic conditions no one could yet name. So name it. The gland is the pituitary. The growth is a prolactinoma, a tiny benign tumor that secretes one hormone in flood. Say the word slowly, because it carries the whole case. That hormone is prolactin, the chemical of motherhood, the signal the body releases after a real birth to switch on lactation, bring in the milk, and stand down the menstrual cycle while a mother nurses. It is the body's "a child is here, prepare to feed it" hormone. And here the switch is jammed in the on position by a growth that doesn't know there is no child. What that flood produces in a woman with no child comes straight out of any modern endocrinology text. It stops the periods. In the great majority of such women today, the cycle shuts down. It brings in milk, that galactorrhea, almost always. It causes infertility, and it is specifically associated in the literature with pseudocyesis, because the body is being chemically told, falsely, that a child has arrived. Now the coroner reads the file back into evidence, all 12 findings through this one lens, every line finally answered. Finding 6, the milk, the lock the whole case turns on. The breasts that produced milk for a child that did not exist were never a delusion. That is galactorrhea, prolactin doing what prolactin does. The single most impossible entry in the file, a body lactating with no baby, is the most ordinary symptom of this tumor. Finding 6 explained. Findings 1, 2, 3. The stopped courses, the swollen aching belly, the heavy low mood at 14, 25 years before Philip. A prolactinoma does not arrive with a wedding. It can sit and secrete for decades. Her strangulation of the womb was this disorder announcing itself early. Findings 1, 2, and 3 explained. Findings 5 and 7, the 2 phantom pregnancies, the swelling, the morning sickness, the stopped courses, the reported quickening, both times. A body marinating in the hormone of motherhood manufactures the early signs of pregnancy whether or not a child is there. Twice the gland told her body a child had come. Twice it had not. Findings 5 and 7 explained, and the longing the old verdict pinned everything on shrinks to what it was, a frightened woman believing the signs her own body fed her. Findings 8 through 11, the vanished eyebrows, the puffy flushed face, the rough voice, the thickening skin, the constipation, the confusion. As a pituitary tumor grows, it disturbs the gland's other outputs, including the thyroid, producing exactly the underactive thyroid picture Moore painted in 1554. The face and the breasts finally have one cause, not 2. Findings 8 through 11 explained. And findings 4 and 12, the headaches and the blindness. The pituitary sits directly beneath the crossing point of the optic nerves. A growth there, pressing upward, causes precisely this: worsening headaches over years, then failing vision, the near total loss of sight that overtook Mary in the autumn of 1558, months before she died. The same growth, early and late, findings 4 and 12 explained. 12 findings entered into evidence, 12 closed by one cause. The false pregnancies and the death are not two tragedies, but the beginning and the end of one. The whole ledger, from the stopped courses at 14 to the eyes going dark at 42, traced to one organ no one in her century could see. And now pay off the mother, because this is where the two files close into one. We will never know what stopped Catherine of Aragon's children from living. That grave we cannot open, and it is not for us to invent a tumour for her too. But we do not need to. The point was never that the two women had the identical illness. It is that their records have the identical shape, a dated, numbered sequence of bodily catastrophe, 5 losses for the mother, 12 findings for the daughter, and that both were handed the identical verdict, wrong both times in the identical way. Catherine's body could not carry, and a court with no medicine for it called her cursed. Mary's body manufactured phantom children, and a world with no medicine for it called her mad. The curse was never in the bloodline. What these women inherited was the blind spot of the men who judged them. I have to be honest about the limits. We cannot prove it. There is no autopsy, no blood to test. A vicious influenza epidemic was tearing through England in 1558 that may have caused or hastened her death. Cancer cannot be ruled out either. Keynes and the others offer the prolactinoma as the best-fitting explanation, not a confirmed diagnosis, and they are right to hedge it. And I am not handing Catherine a diagnosis at all, only pointing out that her 5 dead children were a medical fact dressed as a moral one. But notice what this reading does that nothing else does. It is the only single cause on the table that closes out all 12 findings without asking us to call her mad. It ignores nothing. For 500 years, the kindest thing history could say about Mary Tudor was that she wanted a baby so badly she imagined one. Sit with how that sentence works, because it is sly. It arrives dressed as sympathy. Poor woman, so desperate. And underneath, it is still an accusation, still putting the failure inside her, her longing, her weakness, a mind that couldn't bear reality and so rewrote it. The unkind version just says it louder. Mad, barren, bloody Mary. But the kind verdict and the cruel one agree on the point that matters. Both say Mary did it to herself, the same sentence the previous century passed on her mother, only with God swapped out for madness. And machinery never changed, only the vocabulary did. And the forensic reading turns that over. She did nothing to herself. Neither of them did. If the strongest theory is right, a single hidden growth no physician in 1555 had the language to name flooded Mary with the chemistry of a motherhood that was never coming, then climbed toward her eyes and killed her. And the evidence was lying in the open the whole time. 12 findings nobody thought to number, and a generation earlier 5 dated graves, a bishop called a judgment, and a doctor today would call a pattern. It was never hidden. It was waiting 500 years for someone to read it as a body instead of a failing of character. Imagine being her, and start with the mother, because the daughter never could stop imagining her either. Imagine carrying 6 children and burying 5, and being told by husband, church and country that the small bodies are not a tragedy but a judgment, that God is taking your babies because of something rotten in you. Imagine dying alone in a damp castle, still signing yourself queen, while the realm agrees your empty arms are proof of your sin. Now imagine being her daughter, the one child who lived, spending every year of your life trying to prove the curse died with your mother and not in you. Imagine a body that announces a child to an entire nation. Your belly swells until your gowns will not close, your breasts grow heavy, and then fill with milk, your body doing the one thing supposed to be impossible to fake. You feel the flutter of a life turning inside you, and you weep with relief, because this is the child that finally proves you are not your mother. Imagine the bells ringing out across an entire city for your son, and then imagine the room going quiet, the swelling slowly receding, the milk coming to mean nothing, the cradle staying empty week after week until even you cannot pretend, and you understand that every single person who cheered now knows and is talking and is pitying you or laughing, and the thought that must have come in that dark room, that you have become her, that the verdict skipped a generation and landed on you anyway, that your body has failed in front of the world exactly as your mother's was said to. And then, this is the part that should break you, imagine it happening again. 3 years later, your body raises the whole apparatus of motherhood a second time, except now there is no nation hoping with you. The husband who fathered the phantom has gone. The court murmurs about menopause behind your back, and the only honest voice in the palace is one attendant brave enough to tell you there is no baby, and you thank her. Imagine carrying that humiliation, twice survived, into the last months of a life that is now also taking your eyesight. Imagine going blind, your head splitting, dying at 42, with the thing that did all of this still inside you, unnamed, unseen. And then imagine the 5 centuries that follow agreeing, almost unanimously, that the problem was you. That is the price these 2 women paid for a truth their century had no way to speak. They were not the authors of their humiliation. They were its first and longest victims, a mother and a daughter, blamed for 2 generations for bodies that were only ever sick, never sinful, and never weak. So here is the question, and I want your answer. Do you think the prolactinoma reading holds, that a real physical growth, not a broken mind, built Mary Tudor's phantom children and then took her life? Or do you stand with the older verdict, that this was pseudocyesis, the longing mind acting on the body? And does seeing the same blame fall on her mother a generation earlier, 5 dated losses recast as a curse, make the case stronger to you? Or does that feel like reading too much into one unlucky family? Where do you land, and why? I read every comment, and this is exactly the kind of argument I love having down there with you. If this changed how you see her, if Bloody Mary looks different now, subscribe, turn on notifications so the next case finds you, and share this with someone who still thinks they know who she was. And tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or your country below. It never stops amazing me how far these stories travel, and who they reach.